Hello, my name is John Reese. I am a graduate student taking ECE 574, Advanced Techniques in Engineering Applications, and I'm going to be presenting implementing a trivia bot leveraging agile methods. So this is a relatively big project, so I'm going to get right into it. First, I'm going to introduce the project, essentially what I did, followed by the state of the art. What does the field currently look like for Golang, for trivia, anything relating to this project? Followed by the concept, essentially going over the feasibility, the viability, why this is a good idea, the motivation behind it, if you will. Followed by the problem statement, essentially the overall objective of what I'm trying to solve. Then I get into a little bit of the upfront limitations, the threats to validity, what I know that I can and can't do based on those limitations. And then a large chunk on the methodology. A big part of this was making sure to follow a process, to follow a method. So we'll go in detail about Agile, we'll get into detail about the solid design principles, testability. A large portion will focus on the method because that's mostly what I wanted to get out of this project. Followed up with the results of implementing that method. A brief section on some extra work. Once I completed the project, I want to just do a little more. So we'll talk about that. And then we'll finish up with the conclusion and then a plan for future work. Put simply, consumers of video games are on the rise. Video games are being used more and more in schools for gamification as an incentive to do well in school. They are being used more and more by not just men, but also women. There really isn't that stereotype of men playing video games, so you have more than half the population now playing games. And they're also just more accessible in the sense that mobile phones are getting better and better so that consumers are able to play their games really from anywhere. And these games often leverage voice over IP or VoIP communications, which really increases that bond and that experience between gamers playing those games. So this project is trying to combine both aspects of this to develop a functional trivia application. The application will be built on Discord, which is a VoIP communication, and then the game itself will be put onto that, so to kind of marry both of best worlds. So there's a few applications and framework that closely relate to the state of the art in regards to bots and trivia on the open web. First and foremost, there is Trivia HQ, which is a mobile platform with video streaming and monetary rewards. Essentially, every day at 9 p.m. EST, an actual live show host will appear on your phone and ask you 12 questions. If you manage to get all questions right without getting anything wrong, all winners actually split a prize pool of $5,000, which usually ranges from $10 to $20 a person, depending on who wins. There is also a triviabot.client, which is a holistic bot which leverages the MS bot framework. This project actually leverages the Discord API, so it's not necessarily a MS bot framework, but this just goes to show that there are other bots out there, and there are actually bot frameworks dedicated to this sort of development currently. And lastly, there is OpenTDB, which is an open trivia database, which is a free to use and user contributed question database. So this really enables and facilitates the state of the art. Anyone who wants to create their own trivia bot or host any sort of trivia application, they can use this database, which includes a large collection of questions and answers to really increase the amount of exposure that bots and questions and trivia can get into when using the state of the art. So the concept or the motivation behind all of this is we want to enable the users to use the application longer than they would have otherwise intended. So Discord, again, is a VoIP application, which is primarily intended for communication while playing other games. If you don't intend to do this, you really won't be using the application. So by introducing a trivia bot, people may actually use the application for a different purpose than what it was actually intended for. The open source tooling will actually facilitate development for Discord, so it's incredibly viable. There's already tooling around this, and me as a developer just need to reach out, grab it, and kind of bend it to my will. There's also a very, very small language footprint and ease of scale in order to get this actually deployed out to production. So it's incredibly feasible for really any machine to be able to run this. Starting the application is as simple as calling a go run command, and there isn't much of a footprint to actually get this project up and running. So now that we have a relatively good idea of the current state of the art, what's out there currently, as well as what we're trying to achieve, why we're trying to achieve, and the motivation behind it, the problem statement I put as simply, we want to provide users with a community-driven game where they can socialize, and then I'm going to be leveraging agile methods. So in this case, it's kind of more of an iterative approach. We talk about sprints, and we talk about how that actually brings a lot of benefits to the development experience when trying to solve this problem. There are going to be some upfront limitations for this project. First and foremost, this is a Discord trivia bot. There are actually lots of VoIP applications, Mumble, Ventrilo, HipChat, to name a few. Discord was just chosen for it. They already have an API exposed and its popularity. Discord is probably the most popular VoIP application for gamers. The second limitation is that I just included a single scoreboard. So when you think of trivia, there are generally multiple categories, music and sports, etc. But this one is actually just going to essentially take any question at random from any category, ask it, and then assign a score to the player. There is no notion of a music leaderboard or a sports leaderboard. Lastly, you do need an internet connection. This is a bot who is an online user on Discord, and it's supposed to be community driven. It's supposed to be more than one person. And so in order to interact with that person, you need to be able to have an internet connection and to be online. So this project follows a pretty strict methodology and puts a lot of focus onto the methods used. Right from the get-go, I knew I wanted to take an agile development approach, again, specifically iterative, following the solid design principles, which we'll get into in a little bit, because we really want to make sure that the design of the application is correct, and we're not just writing hundreds and thousands of lines of code without any thought to design. Following a development approach and following good design was very paramount in this project, as well as unit testing to make sure that our project works as expected. The entire project is tested, and at the end of each iteration, we make sure that all tests pass so that there is no regression. So without further ado, let's get into the agile development approach. So this project was written taking an agile development approach from day one, focusing on an iterative method. So this differs quite a bit from the traditional waterfall approach. Waterfall essentially states that you have a beginning, gathering requirements and design, and you just keep going forward and you're unable to go backwards. You essentially start from the beginning and then you end with a final product, and the customer doesn't really know what you're doing until the product is completed. Now, Agile is based off of waterfall, like a lot of other development methodologies, but Agile, being an iterative method, actually allows you to have multiple starts and multiple ends, being able to get rapid feedback and be able to get opinions from other people as you develop. So this is really good for feature by feature development. And so since this is a bot application that has multiple commands, for example, if I have a command to start the bot, I can design it, I can write the code, I can test it, and then I can get user feedback, and then I can deploy that, and then that feature is done. Then if I want to enter a stop command, I can start that whole process all over again, and then without introducing regression into my start command. So the whole process is introducing all of these commands week to week to week. I actually used 1 week as my sprint, and again, each sprint included an entire design, test, and get feedback loop to ensure that everything was following a method and that everything was fully tested. So for the finer details of everything, the sprints began on 10/15, October 15th, and ended on 12/3. So about a total of 7 weeks or 7 sprints. And then the conclusion of each sprint involved end users. And we'll get into that in a little bit. I actually did reach out to some friends, to some colleagues to get some feedback from end users, because users are going to be my customers. They're going to be the people who are actually using this application in the real world. And one of the huge benefits of Agile is the ability to get that feedback soon. So if there's any issue in the design, it's really easy to go back, which is a huge boon from the waterfall approach. And so again, at the end of each sprint, I'm able to validate tests and ensure there's no regression. And then I can even reconsider my design. If I complete a couple sprints and I realize that I need to make some changes, since I'm starting all over again at the end of each sprint, I can say, okay, this design isn't quite working and I need to change it, rather than waiting to the very end of the project where it gets really expensive to make a change because the project is just so big. The quicker you find a bug in the software development lifecycle, the cheaper and easier it is to fix. So that is why I really follow the Agile development approach. I love it, and it was a huge boon in this project. So while Agile helps with getting into a rhythm of getting users involved and hands-on keyboard typing, a development method, I also really focused on the design and the quality of the application itself. And the best way, in my opinion, to do this is the solid design principles. So this is based off of Solid, which is introduced by Robert C. Martin. And you can kind of see on the right-hand side how a couple of the components are laid out. Immediately to the right, there are 2 interfaces, a user interface and a player interface. The bot is just a user. You can see that a user is online and it can send a message. That is all a user can do. But the player can also have a score, it can join a game, and it can leave a game. Now you can have multiple inheritance or segregate the interfaces so that a user is actually a composition of the iUser interface and the player interface, because a user can also have a score, it can join a game, and it can leave a game. Whereas the bot is just a composition of just the user, because we only want the bot to know, is it online and can it send a message? But the bot class itself also has methods for, like a private method for loading questions, as well as the ability to restart, stop, and start. And there's also a backing data store, which we can use to store player information, as well as all of the questions. And so having this sort of interface segregation and single responsibility works in a few ways. So it's single responsibility because we have a bot class that only focuses on the bot. We have a user class which only focuses on the users. There isn't one class that supports both bots and users. It's open and closed because if I want to spawn a new user, I can just simply create a new user and don't need to actually modify the user class at all. The iCommand interface also respects this, because if I want to add a new command, say a restart command, all I have to do is create a new class that implements iCommand, and I don't have to touch any of the other commands. It's also interface segregation because I'm using a single interface and I'm not combining or adding on to the iUser or iPlayer interfaces. And then lastly, it's dependency inversion because there is a 0 to many relationship. So I'm actually passing out interfaces rather than the concrete classes. So if I decide to introduce a new type of command that introduces iCommand, there isn't that tying down of the command class. So following these sort of solid design principles is a great way to achieve loose coupling, high cohesion, and it's a great way to design your application, especially again while using the Agile method. So in this project, you really wanted to focus on design, really wanted to focus on method, and this to me was a great outcome. So we've discussed the Agile development method, essentially how we want to go about getting user feedback, getting the program out the door, and how we want to actually develop the application. We've also talked about the solid design principles, how to create high cohesion and loose coupling to make our program, in a design. We don't want to jump right into coding. We want to make sure that we're actually thinking about our process. And then lastly, we have unit testing, where we want to make sure that we validate that our program is actually working as we expect it to. And I accomplish this by what is called red-green refactoring or test-driven development. And this works by you write your test first. A lot of people will jump right into coding, but with red-green refactor, you actually write a test first. You have some sort of assumptions, some hypothesis of how you want your feature to work. You write a test for that feature, and then it's going to fail because the code doesn't exist. So then you write as little code as possible to make that test pass. And then once that test passed, you know that your requirement has been met. So it forces you to obtain your requirements early. And then you can go ahead and refactor your code if you noticed any sort of mistakes or design problems, and you can feel comfortable making those changes because you have a test around it. So any sort of refactoring that you perform, as long as the test remains green, your functionality should not have changed. And then I used the Golang assert unit testing package, which is a package provided by the Golang programming language, which is essentially a suite of APIs to facilitate all of this. So with Agile combined with Solid, combined with unit testing, we have a project that is followed a method, followed a design pattern, as well as was heavily tested. With the entire project written using Agile and solid design principles and fully tested, the results of the project are essentially an API overview and using the application itself, as well as user feedback. Again, stated previously, I really wanted to make sure that end users were involved in my process, in my method, because the application is going to be used by them. And using Agile, I'm able to actually include them in my feedback loops and make sure that I'm doing everything as expected. So first off, the API usage is essentially a list of commands to use when interacting with the bot. First and foremost, there are administrative commands which only elevated users can use. In this case, it's just myself. And these are relatively destructive commands for disconnecting the bot, resetting the bot, pausing, stopping, and starting. So anything that may be considered disruptive, but needed during a game, but something that not everybody could do, because then you could have people who just randomly decide to stop a current game when they're losing, or they're just trying to be malicious in their intent. And then there are also player commands such as join, which allow users to join the current game in progress, leave, so they can leave the current game in process, and then be able to answer a question with a given message so that they can answer a question once a message has been sent. So you can kind of see an example here where I run the start command and then the bot says, okay, let's play. So as stated previously, I actually involved some colleagues and some friends in this project, really wanted to get some user feedback, because part of using a development method is to actually open a feedback loop and get responses from your customers. And to me, my customers were going to be the people using my application. So I really wanted to include them in my method and really get the full sense of agile development. A big part of agile is to be able to get feedback from your users and then change based on their feedback rapidly. So some of the responses I had, I broke it up into essentially a pro and a con per friend and colleague. The first one had stated that there were lots of questions to choose from, which again is provided by the OpenTDB database, but they said that they wanted to be able to accept less exact answers. And this essentially means if a question has an answer that is 5, the number 5 could be an answer, but also typing out the word 5 could be an answer. However, the database only contains one answer, so you're not really sure which is the correct one. Is it the number 5 or is it the word 5 spelled out? Either should be accepted, which I agree with. User 2 said there was a good concept, which is not a typical use of Discord, which again is also true. Discord is really meant for just talking with individuals playing a different game, not using Discord as the medium or the vehicle to play a game. Questions from specific categories would be nice, and that was kind of a limitation brought earlier. There really isn't a way to currently play games from specific categories. And the last user said it was incredibly easy to set up, which I take a lot of pride in because it is just it's a run command. There really is no setup outside of typing that command. It'll automatically join the server and get ready to go. And then they had also commented that the answers can be kind of specific, which again, that's probably to me even is the biggest drawback, is that you can know the answer, but it can be a little difficult to actually write it down because you don't know what the bot is expecting. So to me, this was a great experience to include user feedback into my development method. I was able to really get the full experience of starting with the design, starting with my code, test, get user feedback, and then make decisions based on that user feedback rather than work in a silo. So with the program completely completed, I got all of the commands that I intended to implement as well as included the user feedback. There were a couple other categories that I wanted to include in the extra work because they're kind of important to me, and these include performance and accessibility. So I kind of realized that when you add more and more people to the application, performance can sometimes take a hit if you have a lot of users who are all typing multiple messages over and over again. The bot can actually lose messages because there really wasn't a data store behind it to manage the large stream of messages. So I actually implemented RabbitMQ messaging, which we'll discuss in a little bit, to handle the load of all the messages. And then secondly was just additional accessibility, and this was done through an online scoreboard. Essentially, the only way to currently get a list of scores was through the Discord application, but there shouldn't be a reason why that the scores shouldn't be accessible online through a website so that you can share with your friends. So for the first part of the extra work was the performance aspect, leveraging RabbitMQ messaging, which is a pub sub model. And how this works is that each user of the application is essentially a publisher. They are publishing messages, and then those messages are put into a queue. And then lastly, the consumer essentially, which is the bot, processes those messages when load is appropriate. So without any sort of queue structure, it's possible that the bot is just going to miss messages. When you have a pub sub model, especially using something like RabbitMQ, all the messages are forever in the queue until they are actually read. So the consumer or the bot is using a queue to pull off messages from the queue and then consume it, act upon it, and then remove the item from the queue, which states that the message has been consumed. So this is actually a FIFO and really helped with the load of the system and made sure that no messages were missed. The second aspect that I introduced was this idea of an online scoreboard. Essentially, this takes the data that was in the Trivia bot database and publishes it to a live score tracker, which again allows users to view statistics outside of the Discord application. There's no reason to open the executable. You can go right to the website and see how you're currently doing overall. And my intent for this was to further promote usage of the bot to encourage users to return, because the whole point of software, is to solve problems, but also have people use the software. If you make the software hard to use or not enjoyable, people aren't going to want to use your software. So I thought this was a really great way to make the application more accessible and have users share their feedback with themselves and their friends. So in conclusion, I showed that this is definitely viable for a trivia bot to exist within Discord. Used it with multiple people online and had a lot of success and had a lot of games shown. This obviously had mostly positive reviews from the users that I did interview. Most of the complaints were essentially around the fact that the answers had to be too specific. The Agile development methodology continues to be a viable choice for software development. It's what I use for this project, and I think it's actually developed a pretty good project following that development method. And then using the iterative type of Agile, ensure that the tasks are broken into small pieces, which to me reduces the risk of missed deadlines. Because if I were to do that all in one waterfall approach, for example, I wouldn't really have an idea of when my deadline is, if maybe I took on too much work and I wouldn't be able to actually change it. Whereas with iterative, I can introduce new commands as I have time to do so. And then I will actually work to implement suggestions in the future work, which is a slide coming up. So for future work on this project, I intend to introduce some language understanding. This is called Lewis in terms of Microsoft, which it should allow for more generic answers. We want to do this because answers shouldn't need to be exact. This was the biggest feedback that I had in the project, and that similar responses could be the correct answer. So language understanding is something that the bot can learn from people typing to accept more than just the concrete answer that exists in the database. And then secondly, which should be a little bit easier, is essentially just category-driven games where we can allow questions to be asked from a specific category. And this is, again, based on user feedback that showed that not everyone was interested in the general trivia, which is going to include topics from every single category, but that users might be interested in more of a topic-specific trivia model. Like, I want all questions that are about music, or I want all questions that are about technology. That's my project in its entirety. I really enjoyed following the Agile development method. That was a really interesting approach to designing software and being able to follow a process all the way through. I felt like I learned a lot. And obviously, if you have any questions for me, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email is jpreese@umich.edu. Thanks so much for watching.